This couple of hours, again, is focused on climate vulnerability and health. And you just heard a few lightning talks and a few exemplars of the kind of talent we have here at the University of Michigan. We have over 8,000 faculty organized into really the top schools and colleges in the country. And then we have the opportunity to try and harmonize some of that talent in some of those schools and centers like ours, the Center for Global Health Equity. What is going to follow this session is a strolling reception where you'll have a chance to see our students and some of our faculty, their posters, and the groundswell of work and attention that is really on climate vulnerability and health. But for this particular session, what we want to do is try and take some advice from our external advisory board at the Center for Global Health Equity. What should great universities like ours be doing in light of this crisis? If you're like me, I get anxious hearing about the problems and the documentation that we're on a dangerous road. What are we to do? Great public universities are supposed to be problem solvers. How should we step up to what is facing us right now? So we have to really comment and to give us advice, our advisory board, and I would really encourage you to pull up their bio information because as you see them listed here, as they're sitting before us, these are incredible luminaries in the field of global health and are helping us to interpret global health equity, especially in these times that we're in where climate and what's going on in the environment is the biggest pressure point on global health equity right now. So we're really grateful for our board who's here giving us advice, and we're going to hear some of that advice real time. What should we be doing in response to some of the things that we're hearing? To facilitate this conversation, I'm really delighted that we have Professor John Overpeck, who likes to be referred to as Peck, and he's the Samuel Graham Dean of our School of Environment and Sustainability. Not many institutions have a school like that that's really focused on the environment and climate. He's been dean since 2017. His career long predated the recent attention on climate change and environmental science. And we've really been fortunate to have him here at the university, and again, trying to synergize all of the pieces that people bring to this discussion. So Peck is going to be reflecting a little bit about how we've started to do things here at the University of Michigan that he's been at the helm for, but then to try and draw out the observations and the advice from our board. So Peck, thank you for leading this session, and we're looking forward to what we're going to learn.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you everybody for sticking with it. This is very helpful, I think, to all of us to understand not just what's going on and what we're doing, but what can we do to rise to the occasion of climate change, which is really something. So I just want to make a few comments. Joe asked me to do this, and then I'm really looking forward to talking to this August panel. And I'm going to make it really easy because we're just going to go right around and talk about one big question. And if we get through that fast, I'll, of course, come up with more questions. That's one thing academics are good at. But why do we really care? I think 2023 really slapped us in the face with a lot of good reasons to care. In 2023, the global temperature jumped more than ever before in any one year since we had thermometers around the planet. The global temperature literally hit 1.5 degrees C above pre-industrial, or just below. In other words, the Paris Agreement we're there. And of course, everyone and all my colleagues point out, we're looking at the longer term warmth, but I'm going to guess 2024 is going to be warmer because so far this year we've broken the record set in 2023. The other thing that really happened last year that's really exceptional is that we had more climate change disasters, billion-dollar disasters around the world than ever before. And we've had some amazing disasters, like in 2022, what happened in Pakistan and India, what's happened in East Africa. The point is that this is starting to multiply around the world. What Paige Fisher was talking about, the wildfires in Chile, and what's going on in southern Latin America. It's just unprecedented. And the thing is, it's not just slowly getting worse. It's getting worse faster. There's a little debate in the scientific community, but I'm solidly on the side of, yes, climate change is accelerating, not just because we see it in the air surface temperature record, but we also see it even more clearly in the oceans. And the oceans are taking up over 90% of the heat that we're trapping with our greenhouse gas emissions. And the last 3 decades, the heat in the oceans has gone up more and more. In other words, faster and faster. So it's really important that we take this message that we're getting and we do something about it. And that's what we're here to talk about. What are we doing at the University of Michigan? I think many people know that we have a new president, Santa Ono, who's sad he couldn't make it here today. But early on in his tenure, about a year ago, down in Detroit, he announced, when asked in an interview, what's his top priority? And presidents of universities, what kind of things they come up with. He said to stop the climate emergency. That was his #1 priority. Fortunately, we already had gotten our act together on this campus to make a commitment to going carbon neutral. And as you know, there are multiple categories of our emissions. And one of them, the emissions due to the energy that we buy, is going to be net zero by next year. But we're also going carbon neutral in many other ways, including our endowment, which I don't know if any other major university is doing what we're doing. And it's going to take time, but we're doing it. So that's good. But gee willikers, is that really going to help the world? Yes, because it sets an example that other universities can follow. And we can also, as we're doing it, create a living laboratory that allows us to demonstrate what's possible. But still, is that enough? And the question is no. We have another major way in academia of really moving the needle in society, and that is through education. And we have amazing students at the University of Michigan, undergrads and grads alike, and we are going to ensure that every single learner at the University of Michigan leaves here with a literacy in climate, climate action, sustainability, and perhaps the most important thing is justice. How do you do this climate action? How do you do the sustainability work in a just way at home and around the planet? And University of Michigan learners are all going to know how to bring this to their careers and their lives as they do what we're going to have to do in this century, which is fight climate change. We have a lot of great research. We heard about some of that great research on the panel, and I'll just speed up here. But the most important thing to realize, and this is where I'm going to start asking a question, is the university by itself can't really move the needle in society enough. And in America, at least, we're under fire, I think, because there's a declining confidence or support of higher education. We're not doing enough for society in higher education. We need to do more. And I'm going to be asking you, what can we do to do more? But in my mind, the most important thing is we have to figure out how to scale up what a university can do in education, research, innovation, entrepreneurship. We got to scale this up to move the needle in society. And the only way we're going to do that is to be looking off campus and partnering with colleagues off campus. At other universities, sure, but business. We got a dean of business here. We can do this with government. okay? We do a lot in the public health sector, for example, with the US government, but governments around the world. We can do this with communities. We can do this with citizens. They're the ones who are going to scale this up to get the job done, and it's our job, in my mind, to empower them. But I would like to make sure that we keep a focus on justice, and I think now I will ask the big question of the day. Question of the day. I didn't make this question up. Our esteemed leader did, okay? But I think it's a great question. We want you all to answer this question. We'll just go right around. What should academia be doing to get out of the ivory tower and be more relevant to the climate crisis that is upon us? If you're in academia, what can we do as an academic community? If you're not in academia, what do you want us to do? All right? Who wants to start? We're going to start at one end or the other. You're smiling. Julio, you get to go first.
I am very much.
He's the president of the university, so he should know.
You don't need to look at my biography. There's only one important fact of my life. I studied at the University of Michigan. I spent 5 years of my life. I have 3 degrees from this great university, and I spent hours in this beautiful auditorium, so it's great to be back.
Yay. So I'll say go blue.
Go blue.
Yeah. He's a football fan.
Well, I was made into one. I used to be a soccer fan, but
it's a big sport in Mexico, yeah.
And now I'm at the University of Miami, so it was great training. You know, for us, it's all, I mean, Miami is ground zero for some of these conversations. But I would say the main thing we do for society as universities is we create frameworks for interpretation. And that, I think, is very important, and we need to disseminate that. We allow society to understand the nature of the problems. For example, I think 2023 was an eye-opener, but I would say that equally, and we haven't emphasized this enough, equally important was 2020. Because we've just come out of a major global crisis called the pandemic, and we tend to think that this is a different thing than climate change because we are so siloed. But when you look at the pandemic, the root causes of the pandemic are the same as of climate change. We think of pandemics because it involves viruses and things, that it's a natural thing. Pandemics are as anthropogenic as climate change, and they both stem from the unsustainable ways in which we relate to the other species with which we share our planet, and with the rest of the planet. Now, there are different crises. The pandemic is a much more intense crisis. The previous panel said it very clearly. Climate change is a slow-burning crisis, although it's accelerating rapidly. But we should take the lessons from that crisis we just came out to illustrate what can happen to us. It's not just about protecting the rest of the species, which we have a duty to do. It is that our own survival is at stake, and use the crisis that the pandemic represented to raise awareness about the twin crisis of climate change, because the root is the same. It's abusive forms of related, unsustainable ways of relating to other species and to our planet in general. Then beyond that, it is true that for common people, probably what worries people the most about climate change is when you make the health impacts more prominent, because that's very close. And I think just articulating those impacts as we frame the question. Extreme weather events, it's not just about the multi-billion-dollar losses. It's about the fact that they are often a source of injury when you have extreme weather events, and very often of infectious disease outbreaks immediately following earthquakes and hurricanes and other extreme weather events. The changing ecology of infectious diseases, particularly vector-borne diseases. You know, I'm in Florida. We now have Zika. We have malaria is appearing in latitudes, in cities in Africa that were built above latitude where the Anopheles mosquitoes didn't grow. They're now there. The changing ecology of those infectious diseases, rising sea levels. the health impacts of heat, just quantifying the number of deaths from heat, that heat wave of last year generated directly a very large number of diseases. We need to quantify and make people aware of those health effects. And then the impacts of climate on food insecurity and therefore on nutrition, the growth of undernutrition. So framing the issues, I think, is the best thing we can say. Once we do that, we cannot just stay in the diagnostic stage. I think we need to move into suggesting. And what we do at universities is try solutions and then see if we can scale them, if we can translate that into policies and into practices in the rest of society, which is why we need to get beyond our walls. But that getting out starts with the way we help society understand the nature of the problem, the magnitude of the problem, the consequences, and then try out some of the solutions, document what works, what doesn't work, and engage with the rest of society to scale them up.
Thank you.
I think you said it all.
Far from that.
Maybe what we could do is hear it all in multiple languages.
Let me try
No,
that.
I bet we have other insights.
No. I think that's, again, maybe picking up from where you started, and I was thinking to myself, what do we say to universities, but what do we say particularly to the health field? And so I'll pick up from you a little bit. There's a whole conversation out there around sort of diets and, the food systems and how food systems and what we eat impacts and affects climate. And we did some work. I was co-chairing a committee on food systems economic transformation. And I think two things came out of that. The first thing is data. We just need enough data to tell us, what is the impact. Now we have a sense. For a very long time in the health field, we were prescribed, and I'm going to make a mistake now, 2100 calories per day was sort of the minimum, I think, food intake, and some combination of what that was. Now with climate change, there's a whole new conversation about what that combination needs to look like. But, and so there's huge debate around, the commission, around, what should we put in? Should it be region or sensitive? Should we be using maize? Maize was a foreign product on our continent. Should, in the African continent, should we go back to food systems? I have this conversation every day with Gary Fowler, who is the head of the U.S. environment, who wants to go back to sort of local seeds in each. But then the markets don't buy local seeds, right? They're all wheat and white bread. But it costs us $11 trillion in poor nutrition. And so in some sense, if you just said climate change was bad, everybody sort of says, okay, fine. But if you say climate change is costing you $11 trillion, and people wake up and they start thinking, okay, well, maybe we need to change a few things in this conversation. And so there's a whole new discussion around, what is the new optimal food basket, one that will not put excess pressure on food and agriculture. That has now led, and I think this is another conversation, to, what are the best combinations of proteins? And this is, I think, for health faculty, the things that you can teach us now is, what do we need to do? What differences in proteins do we need to produce, and how do we need to produce them? But when you do that, then you put a number of people out of jobs, because in Latin America and Africa, 70% still, depend on a particular kind of agriculture. So there's a whole sort of income conversation that needs to go with the conversation on climate and changing of the manure or the fertilizer because of the methane emissions. We talk a lot about CO2. We don't talk enough about methane. But even if we changed all the energy sources and we did not change the way we do agriculture, we will still not meet 1.5, which means essentially we will hit our planetary boundaries. So agriculture is a huge and important part of the climate change discussion. But agriculture is food, and food is health. And so I think that what we look for from universities and institutions like yours is one, helping us establish further those links. But I think what business is also beginning to show us is actually that shifting our nutrition patterns may actually be good business. And that there is a whole new space out there for a market that is asking for, willing to consume more sustainable products. And then the question becomes, how do we bring those together? And I think these are intrinsically interdisciplinary conversations that allow us to maybe, one, get the right kind of food production, two, reduce the disease burdens because we've improved our health care, and finally, because the planet is on fire, put out that fire before we get to where we need, it becomes impossible to put out.
Thank you. I think, yeah, for sure, 20% of our emissions are associated with food systems. And yet we have an enormous amount of people on this planet, I think close to 1 billion, that are undernourished. And then we need the land for renewable energy. We need the land for biodiversity. We need the land for food. So we have a really interesting system, a framework, that needs...
770 million people are undernourished, and 820 million people are obese.
Yeah.
So these are kind of the numbers, and you could solve those two problems with maybe better health care and fix our planet in the process.
Didn't mention that climate action is also speeding up dramatically, but we're still going too slow. But perhaps as we move around here, we can speed up a little too. So everyone has a chance to talk. Srinath?
Thank you very much.
Turn it on.
Which pocket did we put it in? Yep. There's a wire.
Thanks. Well, I think universities need to regain their stature as trusted knowledge creators as well as knowledge communicators. And for that, I think multidisciplinarity is going to be absolutely critical, that different disciplines which are looking at different facets of the problem must pool their knowledge together and try and create solutions which are indeed multisectoral. From, I think, whether it's in research or whether it is in advocacy based on that research, we must move from silos to synergies. And that is where universities can play a role. I believe it's no longer possible that we just merely do modeling of what is happening or likely to happen, or even to conduct studies of the disasters that have been documented. It's not sufficient to catalog the coming catastrophe with increasing precision. We need to find the solutions which are sustainable. And therefore, I think we need to build a large number of partnerships. In the opening remarks, it was referred to as several different colleges and departments of the university being present here and possibly also participating in this endeavor. What we need is to redefine PPP. It's not just a public-private partnership. It's a partnership for a public purpose. And there can't be a greater public purpose than saving humanity by protecting the planet. Now, if you redefine that, and then you can say, you can have the public sector and the private sector working together, two private sector entities working together, the government or the private sector working with NGOs, two NGOs working together, but all with a common public purpose, with defined deliverables and clear-cut accountability. I think we need to create that fairly large platform through the university's convening power to create those kind of partnerships. And then have an action almanac in which we assemble allies, adopt an agreed agenda of action, amplify advocacy, accelerate action, and assert accountability. I think that is, again, the strength of the universities. I believe that we have already enough knowledge for action, though we may continue to do research to improve our capacity to do action. Whether it is climate smart and climate responsive agriculture and food systems, or climate smart and climate responsive healthcare systems, which are also contributing to greenhouse gas emissions, we recognize that there is a mutually detrimental relationship, and that must be snapped at some point in time so that we become both climate smart as well as climate resilient in each of our enterprises. And therefore, I believe the action almanac is to assemble allies, adopt an agreed agenda, amplify advocacy, accelerate action, and assert accountability. But mere modeling is not going to do. I think we'll have to find the solutions. Never before in human history have we been so forewarned about our path to perdition if we follow the current path. But never again in human history, never before again in human history, have we been so forearmed with the knowledge and tools to alter that course. It is a challenge to human intellect and enterprise as to how best we can use that knowledge and tools, and there is no better place than a university to give that call.
The master of alliteration.
So you're a professor of marketing? You have a good board here.
He's the master of alliteration. Everything is an alliteration.
Nelson.
Richard.
Oh, you're Richard?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry.
But I could pass it on to
I'm trying to look at your pictures saying, what you...
Right, thanks. So I think one of the things that universities should be doing is what we're doing here. This session has been my, let me say, most concentrated education on climate change. I mean, hearing what the researchers presented. Now, we just heard that we've been forewarned about this for a long time. But then at the same time, we have people who deny that climate change is happening. And a number of those denying are graduates of universities. They've been to universities and they come up saying there's nothing like climate change. There's nothing like the acceleration. So what we need to do as universities is to get the research that has been presented to us here, bring it down to, let me say, everyday terms, and make sure that anybody who passes through our university gets some knowledge on this. I mean, that doesn't mean that people are going to stop denying what's happening, but at least would have got enough people educated on it so that an argument can be made when people come out denying that climate change is something that's real. Because if I take our universities back home in Ghana, I wonder how many of our students going through the universities actually get something about climate change, even though there are people doing climate change research. And then getting that even further down to lower levels of education. I mean, the one thing that universities do is that we generate knowledge. But then another thing that we don't do too well is communicating this knowledge to people who are not in our field. I mean, one of the things I say is that the greatest comic relief for me is to listen to a doctor on our radios or TVs talking about health problems, and knowing that the only people who are going to understand that are people who were in medical school with him. Because the language being used there is not for the general public. But we need to craft this climate change information in a way that the general public would understand, the average student coming through our university would understand and can talk about it. I think that's a big challenge for us It's linked back to the communication thing, but we just have to basically fight against the misinformation and the myths that are out there about climate change. Thank you.
So I'm not an expert on climate change, so the advice that I'm going to give to what universities or academics should do is the advice that I was given by my students, my early career researchers also, because they are super passionate about the topic. So I do research on health systems, global health, and I always have an equity lens. And in the past 3 years, you cannot imagine how many of my students, PhD students, MPH students, they come to me saying, Helena, why are you not doing climate change research? And I'm like, okay, I've got too many topics. I'm doing all these different areas. Early career researchers, when are we going to develop a plan for research on climate change and health? And through that, 1.5 years ago, I saw them so passionate, and as passionate as I was when I started my career in health systems, in equity, that I thought, I have to do some work. So my advice, and the advice that I got is, Helena, you do so many different areas, find the connections. And I think this has come up today in the presentations. We need to make the connections with the work that we already do and climate change and health. And I'm going to give you 3 examples. So I work on health system sustainability. We need to do much more work on that. Another of my areas of research and passion is migrant health. What is the connection of migration and climate change? And for that, what Julio mentioned is that we need the evidence and the frameworks. So I'm the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Migration and Health. I did a special issue on climate change and migration. And we got 10 excellent papers on the topic. And the third area that Julio has mentioned also, pandemic preparedness. It's very much connected. I have the honor to co-chair a Lancet Commission on pandemic preparedness, developing grassroots indicators for making sure that countries are prepared for the next pandemic. And I thought, first I have my co-chairs, 2 people that I admire a lot, Helen Clark and Sanya Nista. And then I thought, I'm going to have my commissioners because I can choose them because I'm the co-chair. I want the 40 experts in the world, not on pandemic preparedness, on all different fields. So I've got experts, health economists, behavioral scientists, and I've got experts on climate change, on planetary health. We are 40 commissioners, but I want to share with you that this type of work, interdisciplinary work, is not easy to do. So we spent 2 days trying to understand each other. So that was the first meeting. So I think if it works, it's going to be a complete success, but it takes time. So I'm going to spend a lot of time that we understand each other. But what is key is that the planetary health is very much linked to pandemic preparedness, as Julio said. So this is the advice is, if you are new to climate change, use the area that you're working and try to make those connections. And I think all together we can move the field forward. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going fast now. Nelson.
So let me first tell you a story. 15 years ago, I was a dean of School of Medicine at Makerere University. I got money from a philanthropist who agreed to sponsor us for 5 years to do work on climate change. The first thing is we organized a conference that brought together 500 people from the academia, from the public sector, from the policymakers, and from the lower schools. Fantastic conference when I look back. Our guest of honor was the dean of the school of the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine at the time. He came and gave talks. We decided that we shall not serve meat during the 4 days of the meeting. We served vegetarian food all through. And people were asking, why are we doing this? Also, for water that was to be served, we said, no plastic bottles for this mineral water. We need water, but in glasses and so forth. What is the message? two messages there. Actually, we did it for 5 or 6 years, and people were really into it across different disciplines. We brought some people to train overseas in areas related to climate change. Two messages from there is that universities, if they want to move people, they should show that they are really involved and they are following what they are preaching. That's what we did at that conference. But also, now I regret it because 10 years later, the program had stopped. Meaning, when this university starts or continues from where it is now, it should be non-stop to continue doing things related to climate change. As I said, for us, of course, the money ran out, and that's why we stopped. That should not be allowed to happen, meaning that resources should be found to really continue for the next, I don't know how many decades. Second thing I want to speak about, in my country and in East Africa in general, one way of showing affluence that the common people use is to move from a grass-thatched house to a tin-roofed house, which is very hot because of the sunshine. And if the temperatures are rising, of course, it becomes even hotter. We have to educate people to now do the opposite and not continue using tin-roofed houses. Finally, she has talked of pandemic preparedness. I had the courage with my friends, my colleagues, multidisciplinary, to respond to a call which was on pandemic preparedness. We don't know the results yet, but we had the courage, even though we were not experts in pandemic preparedness. But of course, there were some few people who knew very well what they are doing. I have heard here in the last few days, people are saying, but we don't know how to do these studies. But we don't know how to do studies on climate change and so forth. I think it is determination to move forward that can cause change. And therefore, what can universities do? To be determined to start doing something or improving what they are doing, and that will lead to some change.
Thank you.
The only thing worse than my going first is my going last.
You got lots of time. No, I'm just joking.
I'm a lifelong infectious disease epidemiologist, and I strongly believe that the climate change occurs and that the world temperature is going up and the oceans are being heated and that this is accelerating. But other than that, I don't really get it. And I think that the problem is if I don't get it, 95% of the public doesn't get it. And I think that's the main trouble because we haven't really been able to explain it clearly enough and to prove that we can actually do something about it that means anything. Already at universities, people think we're a bunch of people that drive Teslas and eat rutabaga and vegan food from Whole Foods. And they say, well, sure, they can buy Teslas, they're okay. And they think that, and we think sometimes if we make the university carbon neutral, that's going to have some big difference. Now, I think that if the whole country was carbon neutral, I believe that that would be an exemplary impact. Our university is going to be carbon neutral too, by the way. I mean, I think, and we'll feel better about it. But the question is, will that really make any difference to climate change? And the other thing is that we haven't, and you know, our experts admitted that they can't tell much difference between climate variability and climate change. I think we all believe that there's been an increase in climate variability that results from previous climate change. But What we're saying is we can't necessarily reverse the climate variability by preventing future climate change. So we're sort of saying that we're going to have to live with what we have, which is totally unacceptable to the public, who's more concerned about stopping these things. There's not a lot of discussion about the kinds of stuff about reversing climate abnormalities, although there's been some discussion of it, but it's never discussed in any big, as a big part of the problem. You know, we don't get up and talk about whatever they do with clouds. I don't understand any of this stuff, but there are some people who looked into these kind of things and have mentioned that maybe there's a way to reverse some things. The other part is that we don't have, I've never seen anything that looks like attributable risk. And in general, we tend to be, it's easier for us to blame ourselves as a rich country and to avoid any of the politics. In other words, what if methane is a big issue? And we say, well, you know, doing something about that will hurt poor people. And we don't want to even say anything about it because, you know, that's not fair. So we've sort of picked our solutions based upon what we think about as affordability without talking about the attributable difference. I mean, you know, will Biden's law make a real difference if he increases EPA standards in the world? What's the impact of cryptocurrency? Should it be banned? You know, it's huge energy use per area. But, you know, why don't we just ban it? No more cryptocurrency in the world. What does China do? What do all the other countries do? What does India do? You know, what's the attributable risk by country in the world? And then by type. Now, how much is agriculture? How much is, you know, we know, I mean, you guys know all these things, but the public doesn't. The public just hears a few of the things. Things are getting worse, and therefore we need to do a lot of things. Then they see things like people selling carbon credits to each other. You know, that doesn't make me feel good. You know, somebody gets a bunch of carbon credits and they sell it to somebody else who's polluting things, and I'm supposed to feel like we're preventing carbon. I mean, you know. So how do I explain this to my neighbors? That the interventions we propose are going to really make a difference, other than by example. You know, I mean, if we care about it, we should quit eating beef, quit driving cars, you know. Now, you know, you might say, well, if you drive a Tesla for 1,000 miles, the lithium production is worse than driving another car 1,000 miles. I mean, so, but what is the attributable risk to the various things?
I got you.
Yeah,
we basically have to explain things better.
Yeah.
Because everything you said are those talking points of the climate skeptic, and they're all like distracting. Srinath?
Just to respond to Jim, I think.
He's ready this time.
Just to respond to Jim, I think there are different ways of communicating, and we must try and use them all as persuasively and as credibly as possible. The debate between climate variability and climate change can go on. I think there are answers to that. But there is something else which has not been adequately communicated to the public. That's the planetary overshoot day or the Earth overshoot day. Overshoot day in each year, calendar year, is the day on which the Earth has exhausted all its renewable resources for that year and goes back on available resources and consumes them with increasing carbon dioxide accumulation. So it's like an overdraft. In 1970, the Earth overshoot day was on the 30th of December. In 2023, the Earth overshoot day was on 2nd of August, and it's progressively receding. If the entire world lived like Luxembourg, the Earth overshoot day in 2023 would have been on the 1st of February. If the whole world lived like Qatar, the overshoot day last year would have been the 14th of February. So in a sense, while different countries are contributing differentially, the planet as a whole is on an unaffordable overdraft. And that is going to accelerate climate change and make it irreversible at some point in time. So I think the quibbles on what constitutes climate change and what constitutes climate variability and whether we are able to really document it with absolute precision will have to yield place to some action based on the knowledge we already have. And we may not have the perfect solutions, but if the perfect is not immediately possible, then let's perfect the possible.
Great, thank you. We got a problem here, and we got to all work together to solve it. I think that's a common thread. And this is a discussion sponsored by the Center for Global Health Equity. So what I'm interested in is an idea. And I'd like to get your take on this. One way you could approach it is, how do we build a better global network to help each other solve this problem and make sure everyone understands it, everyone understands what the solutions are, what the costs and benefits of each of the solutions are, and most importantly, equity, what their own benefit is. Okay, but here in Michigan, we have a very aggressive carbon neutrality plan for the state, one of the 5 best in the nation, I think. But it requires putting a lot of renewable energy in rural areas. We have a very rich agricultural community in this state, one of the most diverse agricultural sectors in the country. And farmers don't want to have all this renewable energy deployed at the expense of their farming. And so that is slowing things down. I was just at a meeting with a bunch of development bankers last week, and we were talking with Indonesians about what's going on there. They just elected a very progressive, when it comes to climate change, new leader in Indonesia. They really want to do it, but the big thing, and the US is providing money through our recent IRA, who knew this, to decarbonize, get rid of coal in Indonesia. But the coal miners in Indonesia, those communities, and the people who depend on those communities for their income, as well as the coal-fired plants, and all the people that depend on those coal-fired plants for their jobs, they don't want this to happen. It's slowing down. So it's an element, to me, there's reasons for justice. One reason is because it's the right thing to do. It's the moral thing to do. And whenever I tweet the word moral, I guarantee you I get a lot of feedback from the right wing in America. But there's another reason. We're not going fast enough. And it strikes me that the just way to do things, helping those farmers in Michigan understand their benefits, helping those people in Indonesia understand what they get, and making sure they get a benefit from getting rid of coal. In other words, justice is not just the right thing to do, it's the way to speed things up. And I just wonder if that idea resonates with you, and how do we build the networks to do that between the wealthy universities and the wealthy countries and the less wealthy universities in less wealthy countries, but really with the communities, the businesses, and everyone else. We need to all work together. How are we going to do that? You can just raise your hand or start talking.
No, yeah. You know, as health professionals, we see health not just as an area of expertise. It's a widely shared social objective. And that's why it offers a great opportunity in universities to create multidisciplinary interest. Because, you know, to paraphrase a classic, health is too important to be left to doctors and nurses alone. And we need to think of health not as a specialized sector, but as a shared societal objective. It is one where you talked about ethical frameworks, which is widely shared. It can bring people together. But as professionals whose job is to promote that goal, we look at the different elements that threaten the achievement of that goal. And we've been in similar situations to the one you described, for example, with the coal miners and the people who work in furnaces. That was the case of tobacco growers. When all the evidence about tobacco being bad for your health, it was necessary to intervene. And clearly, you ban tobacco, you make it very hard, you tax it, you do all the right things to protect health. You're going to have people who are not responsible for those downstream effects their livelihoods be threatened. All the tobacco growers, including here in North Carolina and other states. Part of your policy, if you want it to be fair, has to include the elements that protect people who are not directly responsible for the policies that led to the harm, in this case, using coal as a source of energy. And you gotta figure out in the equation of solutions, how do you create alternative means of livelihood for those persons, and how do you help them in the transition? And that to me is a key part of a sense of justice. It's not to have people who are not responsible for the harm we're trying to mitigate now or solve now, pay for that in a disproportionate way. I mean, equity has the two meanings of what's called a horizontal equity. Given the same situation or the same needs, treat people equally. But it also has the other meaning of vertical equity, which means that if you are in a different situation, you need to be treated differently. So that's why equity is not the same thing of equality. There are inequalities that are just, that promote justice when you help the people who are in a different situation than you achieve whatever goal or have the same opportunity. And that's why a comprehensive equity lens needs to include those who are in a different situation. It's not just about telling people, stop growing tobacco and starve, and see your kids starve. That's not an equitable solution, even though you are protecting the health of
I totally get that, but how do we in America help, and other wealthy countries help those communities transition out of the polluting industries?
Well, I think a lot of the discussions in the COPs, the different
right, this is loss and damage in a sense.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering, how can we make that go faster? Because there's one way which is sort of colonial. Someone comes in from a wealthy country and says, do this, here's some money. And traditionally a lot of the development banks have just done that. But is that really the way to do it? I don't think so.
I think one way to do it is what we call in economics, there's an externality which was created. And the externality was created because you developed badly. And so essentially, when there is a negative externality, then there is a tax on that externality. And so you put a tax on that. And we have a sense of what is the cost of the externality that has been created. The struggle that we have is that nobody wants to pay the tax because it's a global tax and it's going to be what we call a global common. So it's not, let's go help you because you're suffering, is essentially, again, and the problem that we have with this tax is because climate change is transboundary, it's very difficult to assign national taxes to it, right? And so we come up with carbon taxes or carbon trades. Now the problem with the good thing about carbon trades is, yes, we actually now have some markets that function for it. However, again, on the global equity point question, we have, in some sense, greenwashing. We've and I really like your crypto example, and I'll come to it in a minute. Is that because we've now said, but we can't really tell whether you are actually sequestering carbon, so we don't know how to reward it. So we'll reward it at the lowest possible denominator, which we all know is, useless. And so essentially, what we need to do, and what universities should be trying to do, is say, How can we get into a compliance system? In the United States, we have compliance systems. We have exchange-traded systems, which will give us the right price for carbon. So we don't want to beg. We want, again, in an environment, in an economic environment, if you create an externality, we put a tax on you and you pay for it. It's not a gift, but it's the cost of your externality. And we can measure the externality, but we don't want to be, we say we cannot measure the tax. That's a lack of equity, and that's the system we are in today. And I think that in a university setting, maybe working towards compliance systems, towards tradable carbon, and it works because from where I come from, what we have done, Africa, the Amazon and all, we actually, like you say, if the peatlands of Africa did not exist, 3 years of carbon sequestration every year is what we are actually doing. So we are actually, as the African continent, saving the world. We are creating and providing this global commodity, which if we didn't do it well, and we saw what happened in the Amazon, right? When the former president decided to cut the trees, it accelerated our 1.5 degrees. And so in some sense, again, I think that what universities need to do, and I'm passionate about this, is give us the data, tell us the cost, tell us the price, and let's not have endless discussions on, oh, we can't measure it and we're not sure about it. But if we could do some work on how can we do compliance trading for carbon globally, I think we would move the debate forward because, quote unquote, second one, and I stop here, is that all the subsidies to the agriculture sector. The subsidies to the agriculture sector, or the energy sector
Fossil
in the
fuels.
developed world is what is killing this process. So then when you do all of this, you go to Indonesia and you say, the 7 coal producers there, you have to shut down your coal production. When we are, come on, so the 7 producers in Indonesia say, I'm not going to shut it down until you're able to give me my net returns on investment for the next 30 years. And then we say no.
Extraordinarily
You
hard.
mentioned
It's extraordinarily hard to sell prevention at all. I mean, we can't sell vaccines to people that'll prevent something next week. When you have something that'll prevent something from getting worse 10 years from now, but won't prevent what's already happening, which is what they're worried about, it's a very difficult sell. And the other thing is that if there's a transfer of resources from one country to another, it can't necessarily compete with the things that have more proximal credibility. You can't say, well, we're going to stop with bed nets, or we're going to stop TB, or we're going to stop vaccines to do carbon reduction. You've got to be able to add something. You've got to add it all on. And it's got to be done without any perceived prevention benefit, because you're not going to be reducing the adverse reactions. You're just preventing the future. It's a little like the way we deal with our budget in the United States. We're bankrupting our grandchildren. But I mean, that's hard to sell.
But one way to do it in America, let's use what we're trying to do here as an example. If someone you want to put wind or solar on their farm, you have to figure out a way that they feel that they're getting rewarded.
You price it.
And then you're basically getting a future benefit now. And the question I have is, how do we make sure that the people, not just the, say, government, because we know that in many countries governments can be a little corrupt, the people get the benefit now for getting out of coal mining or coal producing energy?
So responding to the question I'll ask is, the things being raised here are very important. Universities are places where we're supposed to think and come up with solutions. How much are we doing that as universities? Coming together, asking these hard questions, and proposing a model. So I think that's one thing that universities should do.
Do it in a partnership, right? If we're going to do it in Ghana, it should be Ghanaian universities
exactly.
who are coming up with the solutions with Ghanaian communities, and we can help that.
Well, I wouldn't say just Ghanaian universities coming up with a Ghanaian solution. It's a global thing. Yeah. There should be some partnership. And there are certain strengths. Now, I don't know how this is done, but then if it comes to something like whether it's modeling or doing something like that, there are probably people in universities in the US or in Europe who have got more resources at their disposal to answer these questions. So to say the Ghanaian university should come up with a Ghanaian solution, no, but there should be a partnership coming up with
right.
a solution that can work in Ghana, solution that can work in the US and all that. These are hard questions, but then we've got to come out with the answers. I mean, the other thing, which, I mean, not in the area of climate change, is to do with, let's say, the whole politics and let's say academics or whatever. I mean, one thing that happens is that we have a country where they come out, the government, the president or whoever, Minister of Finance, reads some budget. There's so many economists who were his classmates who say that budget doesn't make sense. But then he still goes with that because that's the party line. And the question is that when will he get to the point where that Minister of Finance reads that budget and every single economist in Ghana, his classmates, everybody else kind of like says, no, this doesn't work. But then you find some who are saying it works, others who are saying it doesn't work just because of their political inclination. So there's a sense in which we shoot ourselves in the foot. And there's some academics who major in this kind of thing also. I don't know how to silence them and get them to say the right thing, but sometimes probably we, the educated ones, basically contradict each other so that the coal miner, there's no point listening to these people. I'm still going to produce my coal.
You mentioned the loss and damage fund. That is a reactive response which is necessary, but after the damage has been done. There is a global green fund, which is undersubscribed, but also underutilized. Many low and middle income countries are unable to submit the projects which will actually get them the funding available from the Global Green Fund. Universities should step into that space, try and assist the governments to develop projects which are both viable and valuable, and try and access those funds as well. And once those funds start getting accessed, possibly we can put pressure on different groups, public and private, to increase the funding of the Global Green Fund to find the solutions. So I believe that universities ought to really step into that space.
Especially if we could show that if money is invested, there will be results. And the results are equitable. They're good for the people who are in those countries. They're getting the benefits.
The other important thing, and I know we're at the end, as a message of what we can do, these are wicked problems. They are incredibly complex. There are no easy answers. But what universities create is a space for debating and for disagreeing and for the clash of ideas in the search for solutions. And I think maintaining that climate and bringing the rest of society along, understanding that some people are not, that not everyone is going to agree, but creating the possibility of a discussion like the one we're having. And the other thing that we do, since we're trying to say what is it that we contribute to this solution, is to function as exemplary institutions. And that means to adopt internally the values and behaviors that set an example for the rest of society. And that does start by, and I'm glad the University of Michigan is doing that, my alma mater is doing that, by we ourselves looking at our own contribution to the problem. Universities, and especially those that have large academic health systems, because Srinath mentioned that the health sector, which is the largest sector of the US economy, is a major contributor to the problem. And assuring that we ourselves in our operations are adopting sustainable policies and are moving to carbon neutrality and are doing our part, in addition to what it contributes to the overall problem. And I do think it's more than Jim was giving it credit. I do think it makes a difference, because higher education and healthcare, which are the two sectors that we're in, are huge parts of the economy, certainly in the United States, but in many, many countries of the world. So it's a place to start, But it's not just what we contribute directly to addressing the problem, it's that we set an example to the rest of society of how it can be done. And universities need to be willing to invest the resources that are required to show that it can be done, that we can actually reduce our footprint, our carbon footprint, and we can develop sustainable practices in our own internal operations. That exemplary role of universities, which is a very old idea of universities as setting an example for the rest of society of which we're a part, I think is more necessary today than ever.
My negative, go ahead.
I wanted to provide a positive comment. So I think an issue that has not been mentioned is that there's much more funding for research on climate change right now. At least in Europe, European Commission is investing a lot of funds on that, and Wellcome Trust. So not so sure about NIH, but definitely many funding schemes. The second point is that many universities are establishing centers on climate change and the relation with health, and they're hiring staff. I see that in many universities, many post professors, research fellows. There's lots of academic positions now making those connections. And the final point I wanted to make is that we're also seeing low-middle income countries, high-income countries, networks developing of early career researchers that are super passionate about the topic and that they're going to provide the research and the evidence and the action needed.
Excellent. We're out of time, I think. Joe is left.
He's behind you.
Oh, he's behind me.
Let's capture, I saw two other
We got
hands
two
up
comments
here,
down there.
and, from Nelson and Jim, and then we'll bring it to a close.
Okay,
Pat.
thank you very much.
Despite all my
Extra
negativity,
minutes. We're in
despite
extra
all my
time.
negativity, I think the
We're
time
number
is
drop.
right. Because, never have people been so concerned about climatic adversity than now. I mean, it's worse and people are more concerned about it than ever. And I think what a university could do is develop a global national budget to maximize the impact, and then a global budget to maximize the impact. So what all should be done in the United States to impact climate change, and what would it cost, and who might pay for it? And then the same thing globally, but especially you start with the United States. And then how much impact could we expect to have if we spent all of the money? And what should the priorities be, rather than just let the politicians do it?
People are doing that. We're interviewing in a couple days a woman who does climate finance. And one of the things she's written about with colleagues, I think at the World Bank and a bunch of other places, is how there will be trillions of dollars in benefits if we act on climate change. And we have other scholars, probably economists, and who have said, here are the things we need to do to stop it.
Or input budget, not just an output budget.
Nelson, please.
That's nothing.
Yeah, so University of Michigan has created partnerships on so many things with the low and middle income countries. I'm wondering why there may be a thinking that such partnerships cannot be created for climate change. I think it is very possible. Just give it a try. In my country, the ordinary people, are talking of climate change because they are seeing changes that have taken place. And therefore, mobilizing collaboration with those places, I think is not as hard as we imagine. The trouble is, we spend a lot of time talking to ourselves, academics, and we don't talk to what I call the real people who are out there. I think we should give it a try and talk to bring the public into the discussion. Last point, I think Michigan should not think alone. They should think with other universities, other academic institutions. I know that the US Academy of Medicine has planned 3, I don't know whether they are workshops or consultations, 2 in April and 1 in May. And I'm sure there are people here who are members there. and they can go and participate in those discussions. So it shouldn't be Michigan alone. It should collaborate with others in the country.
Ohio State. Yeah.
Well,
All right, boss.
It's such a great tone to end on. I'm grateful to Dean Overpeck. I'm grateful to, I see a number of deans here, because I think we've heard some very powerful advice. I think you all appreciate how lucky we are at the Center for Global Health Equity to have such an incredible external advisory board who are we're learning a tremendous amount with this visit. We're committed to being better, and would really like to thank you for the time and the energy that you've put into your visit here at the University of Michigan. Right now, we're going to stretch. We have a reception for hopefully the conversations can continue. We have a number of posters and opportunities to see what our students and what some of our faculty are doing. But we hope this is going to further the movement of our times in terms of global health, in terms of the survival of our planet, of all of us. So I look forward to seeing you in conversation, and I wish everyone a good evening. Thank you.